Okay, for this lecture, this is going to be our talk on World War II and the war itself. At this point, we've kind of gone over uh, kind of the move from isolation to getting involved to intervention up to Pearl Harbor. We talked a bit last week about the home front, Japanese internment, and how women got involved in the war and how it affected everyday life. But this today is the day I'm going to actually talk about the war itself. And we'll get into some of the battles and more importantly, the strategy and the tactics, maybe what you would call the diplomacy of how the United States interacted with the other countries during the war. I'm going to use two links here. So I'm on our unit page, and I'm going to use the fill in the blank notes. We've used these before. They're already filled in for you, and you can click through the blanks and see what the answers are, but I'll use that and talk through that here in just a second. Today, we're going to be on page 3 and 4 on that document. But I'm also going to use these down here. This link is called World War II maps. And so I'll start here because I think this is important for students to kind of get a grip on is what did the world look like in terms of advancements and who controlled what area when the war began. So you could pull this up and look at it yourself. I'm actually going to flip over. I downloaded it and I'm going to look at it in this program because it's clearer. Okay, I got two maps here, and we'll get to the second map, but this first map here is a map of Europe. So here's Great Britain and France, and here's Germany, and here's the Soviet Union over here, the Middle East kind of down here in this region, and then North Africa in the bottom left. Just so you know, this is the Atlantic Ocean over here, and America is to the west. And then Japan is going to be in the far east off this direction. So everything you see here in blue is controlled by Hitler and the German Nazi army in 1941 and 42. And so like normally Germany is a country that a fairly large country in Europe, but it's like right here. At this point, after the 1930s, the Germany has expanded out and conquered all of France. It's expanded south and made an alliance with Italy. It's expanded east and has begun to invade the Soviet Union, and it's expanded north and conquered these kind of Scandinavian countries. So the German Empire, if you will, is huge. And this is in 1941. So when Japan finally attacks the United States at Pearl Harbor and we get involved in the war, this is what the world looks like. And Germany is already fighting Great Britain. They are sending the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, to bomb Great Britain relentlessly. And the German army, what's called the Wehrmacht, has invaded the Soviet Union. This was called Operation Barbarossa and leads to the Battle of Stalingrad. So, this is a crazy world and a crazy war that the United States is entering into. Most of our discussions of strategy now deal with what is called the Second Front. And I had you guys watch and research and do an assignment on this last week, but just to be clear, in 1941 and 42, the Soviet Union is taking the brunt of the pressure. Tens of thousands of lives are being lost in fighting over here on what's called the Eastern Front. And the Soviet Union, their essential demand is they want Great Britain and the United States to start a second front or a Western Front as soon as possible. So like when you were doing that assignment last week, that's what the Soviet Union wanted. They wanted fighting to start somewhere over here to relieve the pressure. Now, for the United States and Great Britain, the question was, where is that fighting going to happen? The United States says, hey, we should invade France, the north coast of France here, where the Germans are occupying, and you could invade here, get a beachhead, and then begin to fight back to the center of Germany. The problem is Great Britain had essentially, that's what they did in World War I. And if you remember World War I, there were trenches all throughout France where the fighting just bogged down, and Great Britain lost tens of thousands of lives, just like the Soviet Union was doing over here. So Great Britain did not love that idea of crossing the English Channel and invading France. Winston Churchill, the leader of Great Britain, he says, attack the Nazis where they're the weakest. Down here in North Africa, these are the longest supply lines for the Germans. This is the furthest reach. North Africa, at the start of the war, were colonies of France. And so when the Germans conquered France, they gained these North African colonies. And Churchill says, let's attack and start a second front in North Africa. This will cut the Germans off from getting to the Middle East through what's called the Suez Canal, cut them off from oil and energy, and then we could attack the Germans through what was called the soft underbelly of Europe up through Italy. So America wants to go this direction, and Great Britain wants to go this direction, and the Soviet Union just says, do it now, either one. Long story short, FDR keeps promising Soviet leader Stalin that we will come, but he agrees to do the North Africa approach first. This is called Operation Torch, and that does have some success, but it takes time. And eventually in 1944, we will cross the English Channel in what is known as D-Day, and we will invade the beaches of Normandy, a coalition of Canadian, British, American troops under the leadership of General Eisenhower, and begin to take back Europe and move in on Berlin. I say all that so that you get an idea of the scope of the war, but also the time. That invasion of France doesn't happen until June 1944. So, that's 2.5 years after this has taken place. It is a long war. It is a costly war, but ultimately the second front is going to be what helps America and the Allies defeat the Germans. And we get here in June of 1944. The rest of the war plays out over the next year or so. And in May of 1945, Germany will surrender. It's called VE Day, Victory in Europe. Okay. Next thing, I'm going to skip over to this map. And this map is a similar map, but over in the Far East. Here is Japan. And this is in 1942. So this is after Japan has attacked Pearl Harbor, which is off here to the east of this map. It's out in the middle of the Pacific. But much like Germany, everything in red here is controlled by Japan. They've expanded their empire throughout Southeast Asia and into the Pacific. Different islands, Guam, Wake, the Marshall Islands, Gilbert Islands, but also over into these areas here, the Philippines, which was an American possession, if you'll remember from earlier in the year. And this part here called Siam, which we now know as, and French Indochina, which we know as Vietnam. And here's Korea and China. So Japan had been very expansionist too. After Pearl Harbor, the United States chose to focus on Europe first, but eventually will adopt a policy known as island hopping. And what island hopping said was America had to slowly take back one island after another to kind of march in and move in Japan. Island hopping, we did these small islands. We did not go straight for the big, powerful strongholds like the Philippines or French Indochina. We started small and worked our way up and through. Some of the final islands that America had to take before getting to Japan were the islands of Iwo Jima and the islands of Okinawa. In 1945, after a long process of island, the turning point was actually an island just off of this map called Midway. And there's a movie recently about that. But Midway is the turning point of the war against Japan, much the way D-Day was the turning point against the war against the Germans. But after Midway, we marched through some of these islands, and some of the last islands in this island hopping strategy are Iwo Jima and Okinawa. From these islands, America will be able to land airplanes and can now conduct bombing raids on Japan. These were the final two islands before we possibly invaded Japan. And it's going to be these two islands that are instrumental in helping America to drop the atomic bomb when we drop the bombs on Japan that leads to their surrender. I'm going to do a whole nother lecture in a couple days on the diplomacy and the use of the atomic bomb. But for right now, I just need you to know that in Japan, Midway was the turning point. There was island hopping, and then Okinawa and Iwo Jima. Just so you know, to take these islands was incredibly costly in terms of human life. The death count, the casualty counts in Iwo Jima and Okinawa are tremendously larger than D-Day in France. The Japanese had basically bunkered down in rocks and caves on these islands and took an immense amount of bombing. And then when American Marines tried to take the island, it was incredibly long and tedious physical combat. Iwo Jima took place around February of 1945, and then Okinawa in April of 1945, leading up to Japan's surrender in August of 1945. Okinawa is the deadliest battle of World War II for America. And when Japan does surrender in August of 1945, we would call that VJ Day. VE was victory in Europe, and then VJ, victory against Japan. That's enough for the maps. Real quick, let me just click back to the unit page, go to the fill in the blank notes. And again, I'm not going to read this to you, but I strongly encourage you guys to pull this up. It should load. We've already gone over the first two pages in a different lecture. Zoom out. There we go. So go to page 3. And again, the blanks are filled in for you here. So the big three, Great Britain, the United States, and Russia, you can fill in the names. That's Churchill, FDR, and Stalin. Here's a map that talks about some of those things I mentioned, D-Day, Operation Torch, the Eastern Front and the Western Front. So definitely look through that and check out these fill in the blanks. The United States produced bombers to help the British while the Soviet troops were fighting on the Eastern Front. It runs through the North Africa invasion, the Italy invasion, and then the D-Day France invasion. Island hopping, some of those major battles, Midway and Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The goal of island hopping, I said this, but strategic islands with airstrips. We needed to be able to land planes so that we could eventually bomb Japan. By the end of the war, I didn't mention this, FDR has passed away in April of 1945. So the new American president is Harry Truman. He was known for being decisive and making decisions. He used the phrase, "the buck stops here," and he was the one who authorized the use of atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered unconditionally, and Truman, and we'll talk about this in the next lecture. Of course, using atomic weapons is extremely controversial. America is the only country that's ever done it, and it's never been done again. So that tells you the magnitude of that decision. But it did lead to Japan's unconditional surrender, and it avoided, let's see, you can't really see it because my picture's there, a full-scale invasion. So America did not have to send troops into Japan itself, which would have resulted in the loss of a lot of American lives because Japan surrendered without the invasion. Okay, definitely read through these notes, check out the fill in the blank. Hopefully the maps help give you a visual. And then I will be back later this week to talk a little bit more about the end of the war and the controversial nature around the use of the atomic bombs. All right, thanks for watching.